And I believe that we're going to start with the presentation by Northeastern Common Sense, right? Dan, are you presenting? All right, so
That's me.
that's great. Thank you for doing that. We'll get going. So the floor is yours. You have 25 minutes.
All right, Marcos, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for having me tonight. Marcos, I hope you feel better soon. You're coming through great, though. We hear you loud and clear. Let me share my screen. Well, actually, hold on a moment. Sorry. Let me do this first. I get my slideshow to start. There we go. Okay, let me share my screen, and then we're ready to go. And I am going to do my best to do my presentation part as quickly as possible, and then I want to hear your all's opinions, right? In fact, I have a couple of different questions I want to share with you all. And also, just to kind of preface, right, I understand that you have a kind of a second half of the meeting where you, and so if it makes more sense for me to leave the slides with you, I can email them to Renee or or you, Marcos, and then to get feedback to me afterwards. That's great too.
That will be useful because sometimes people will refer to something specifically, and if we don't have a way to go to that part of the presentation, it makes it a little harder. But I appreciate you.
Of course. And so, yeah, so then I'll do that while Matt is talking. But so, okay, I am from Northeastern University. I'm a professor there. I also run a center called the Boston Area Research Initiative that pursues civic research in collaboration with local communities, specifically where there's an opportunity to use data and technology to advance justice in one form or another. And I'm one of the leads on this project called Common Senses. And basically, the vision for Common Senses, which is a collaboration between DSNI, Project Right, which many of you are probably familiar with, as well as a few of us at Northeastern, including the Boston Area Research Initiative. You see Bari there, and the Mayor's Office of Housing and the Department of Innovation Technology at the city. This is funded by the National Science Foundation, and the mission and goal of the project is to enable science-driven, community-led solutions advancing environmental justice around the Blue Hill Avenue Housing Action Plan, which you may be familiar with. It's a bunch of parcels along Blue Hill Avenue that are city-owned that they're seeking to develop into housing. And the focus is really on green infrastructure and other ways to limit heat, air pollution, and other environmental hazards. And so the vision of this was always to be able to put the science, the sensors, environmental sensors, and things that can measure hazards in the hands of the community so that the community could design solutions and submit those to the city. And so we've been going for about a year now, actually a bit more than that, but we've been really active over the last year as we built a plan. And so what have we done so far? And then I have kind of a thing that we need to make some decisions on, and we wanted to talk to you all. So we've done 4 workshops this year with over 100 community members identifying local hazards, right? Telling us where the heat, the air pollution, the noise, the rodents, the tree maintenance, the traffic, and so on all are. We took all of those maps and we digitized them. We entered them into the computer and we turned them into these, which basically capture across those 100+ people where the greatest concern is in the community. So as you can see, a lot of concern about air quality down on the left there, the yellow one, along the Blue Hill Avenue spine. Same with heat, right? There's a big dot there, that's Quincy and Blue Hill. But also maps on where people see noise being an issue, where people see rodents as an issue, so on and so forth. And then we took those maps to a bunch of block parties this summer, including DSNI's Multicultural Fest. And we asked people, well, now that you see this, and that you and your community members have pointed out, or your neighbors have pointed out, where do you think we should put environmental sensors, right? So boxes that literally track things like heat, air pollution, and noise. And we got a bunch of really great suggestions. As you can see, not surprisingly, right, that's the dots that are added to this map. There's a lot of people who wanted to put one at Quincy and Blue Hill, right? A lot up and down Blue Hill Avenue. And then but in other parts of the neighborhood as well, where people wanted to be able to advocate or to be able to track what the conditions are like there. And we received over 60 proposed locations during those block parties. So now, fast forward to today, the thing, and this is the reason why I'm here tonight, we need to select the first set of sensor locations. The first bunch of sensors need to go up before snowfall. And because Public Works has to help us do it, and they put up all of the holiday lights, we need to make decisions rather quickly. And what you see on the right here is what these sensors would look like. So they're a box yay big, about 1.5 feet square, that would sit on kind of a light pole or a post about 10 feet off the ground. And just to clarify, they would collect information about air quality, heat, and noise. They would be powered by solar. They would collect no identifiable information. They would collect noise level, but they wouldn't collect any, like, they wouldn't be recording anybody or anything, nor would they be capturing video. I just want to be very clear about that, because sometimes sensors create anxieties that people are collecting inappropriate information. We would also put QR codes on them and such to ensure that people can get information about them at any time. Now, alongside that, we also received lots of comments about other hazards in the neighborhood. And I'm not going to talk about this as much tonight, but happy to talk about it further at another point, about things that can't be measured by sensors, right? Things like rodents, tree maintenance, traffic. And so my class this semester at Northeastern is going to be using city data, things like 311 records, 911 records, building permits about construction, to see if we can develop measures that will do the same thing as the sensor does for heat, let's say, for something like rodents and where they are. And actually, we're hosting a workshop next week at DSNI where the students are going to brainstorm with community members about the best ways to do that. And then I just want to give you a sense of what comes next before we dive into the interactive part of this, so that you have a sense of our roadmap going forward. Once the first sensors are installed, we'll start collecting data from them. We also are working with folks at DSNI, including Renee and Mike Polio and Tu, to develop kind of a process for collaboratively designing and selecting the rest of the sensor locations with the community. And eventually, we're building a dashboard for community members to use the data. So as the data start coming in, we want to be able to establish this. And this will be another co-design process. This is an example on the top of a dashboard we've been building in Chelsea with some partners there, just as an example of the kind of thing that we could do. You could catch change in, this is air pollution over time. You can look at a map of sensors in that case. So lots of flexibility there, lots of things we could do in collaboration with the community. And then the bottom is just an example of our Boston data portal where we publish lots of different data, including things like measures from tax assessments. That's a residential land value. So that's the overview, right? That's the thing. And so the reason why I'm here is to give you that update, but also we really need your input on this first 10 sensors. So we are able to put up, we think, 10 sensors this fall. That's our hope, working with Public Works. They want to start small. That would be 20% of the locations that we have budgeted from the National Science Foundation. So that means there's 80% to go, and we would love to continue working with you and the broader DSNI community, as well as folks on the southern end of Blue Hill Avenue too, with Project Right and such, about placing the other 50. And for the moment being, with the first 10, we're proposing starting with Blue Hill Avenue, right? It is the spine of the community. It's the place where the housing action plan is, which was kind of a major intent of the project, to track the impact if there's going to be construction, right? We need to know what the conditions were before, and then as people start building something, to understand what would be after, and gives us the opportunity to shape that process as well. And it also, if you look at these maps, it's the area that was of highest concern for the community through the workshops, and the place where the most sensor locations were suggested. So we figured that would be the best place to start, and then we can kind of build the sensor network out from the spine over the course of the next, well, probably in the spring. So yeah, so now comes the interactive part, which could be a lot of fun, and also completely understood if you want to then take it back to the post kind of presentations deliberation and get me feedback after the fact. But essentially, we have three things we need to decide. One is along the housing action plan. So it's sections B3, B4 for those who have been following the housing action plan. We're recommending 5 locations. They're the ones that are circles on the map, and I'll show you them more closely. And the big question there is, because of technical challenges with putting up basically the air pollution boxes and the boxes with noise sensors in them are different boxes. And so we probably have to start with just one for now and can put the other one up in the spring. And we wanted to see with all of you which one would be the greater priority. Would you want to learn about air pollution in advance and then add in noise as construction is potentially beginning and such? Or would you want to know about noise in advance and then learn about air pollution at a later time? And both types of boxes will be able to measure temperature. The second question is the rest of Blue Hill, right? And we were thinking about 3 additional landmarks along Blue Hill in the count of 10. And we've thrown 6 on here, and I'll show you them. Those 6 are just ideas that we had based on community input. They could totally move, but those are ideas to kind of pick from. And then the last one is comparison spaces with fewer hazards. This is actually really important because from a sensor perspective, and actually from an advocacy perspective, it's important to know where it's better. If you're going to be concerned about a place where there is a lot of air pollution, we have to be able to say, well, over there is less, right? Over there, it's not as hot. And the community provided a bunch of great ideas about places in the area that would be interesting from that perspective. A lot of green infrastructure, parks, leafy streets, so on and so forth. So we really want input on those as well. So, all right, Marcos, give me feedback here for a moment. Do you think this is a good time to just kind of dive right in and start talking about these 3 things? How do you think the best way to use the rest of the time is?
I would say, I would want to sort of give the opportunity for people, if they have a pressing comment, to sort of just so we can jot it down. If it can't be addressed right away, because there's some questions already on my mind.
Great. Yeah.
Does anybody have any sort of immediate comments, feedback on what has just been shared? I don't see any hands popping up, and that's a good sign to say keep going.
Okay, Marcos, do you want to ask any of the questions you have right now?
Well, so my initial thought was to recommend Blue Hill first, right? And that's the case. But when you had the two maps side by side, there were some spaces along Blue Hill that had nothing. And so I was curious, like right there on the yellow, right?
Yeah.
There's this whole gap. And is it because people from that part of the neighborhood didn't show up, or is it something else that led to nothing going there?
I think that's a really good question, Marcos. And we've been debating this. We've been debating this with Renee and Mike, and we've been debating this with the folks from Project Right. And I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think it's a little bit, these maps show us who showed up at some level. And on the other hand, too, though, that part of Blue Hill opens up a little bit. Right. And so it seems that people were more concerned about that top part of Blue Hill where it's really narrow until you get to Quincy, and then it opens up. I wonder if people experience less air pollution and maybe a little bit less heat, although you can see it still appears on the heat map a bit, because it's not exactly filled with trees. It's just a little bit wider. So it's one or the other. I'm not entirely certain which one it is.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious as to whether something in the infrastructure changes that gives people the impression that nothing is urgent there. But that was my one question. And then the other question probably is more general in terms of the city's role, and whether there's any conversation around what they may be looking at in terms of mitigating some of these issues, besides just tracking, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the $1 million question, Marcos. And the city, the city has been very receptive to the conversation. The folks from Mayor's Office of Housing, the ones who are overseeing the housing action plan, have basically said to us, we think this actually could be a great way to do equitable planning and to actually hear the community. I think they're tacitly admitting that, if the community has like hard data, quote unquote, it could help to convince them, and to convince developers that, this could use a green roof, right? Or there really should be a greenery to building ratio here, those sorts of things. So they've been receptive, and I mean, it's a longer conversation we can have, but I think the Wu administration is looking to do those sorts of things, but they're sort of stuck with the history of how things have always been done, and they're looking for ways to do it that, yeah,
Mhm.
that feel good, for lack of a better phrase. But they've been very receptive, and in fact, we have a person on the team who is a full-time employee at the city, who is funded off the grant, who is helping to navigate a lot of these relationships and conversations.
That's great. One final comment, which again, because of my work and working with the business district here in Four Corners, I thought about some of the businesses themselves, and I know that folks are really happy to have Madhouse Motors, the cafe there at the end by Dudley.
Mm, yeah.
And I was in a conversation with some folks about that, and I thought to myself, well, I would not want to be sitting outside, either breathing that air or like listening to all that noise, right? So it's just I mean, from a health perspective, it's also important to think about, like, how much noise can you tolerate, right? Or how much air pollutants should you be breathing in while having a coffee outside, right? So
That's a really good question, and right, that's a tough intersection.
yeah.
Let's just let's just put it that way. That's a tough intersection, and you're probably right, and that's why people recommended. Actually, it's funny, we don't actually have people who recommended uh Dudley Common as a place for a sensor, which surprises me a little bit, because last week when we were talking with Renee and Mike, I think and
Mhm.
two, I think it was the first thing Mike said. Mike was like, well, Dudley Common, clearly. So yeah,
I
that's
would
a
agree.
space that merits it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's just unsafe, right? Just the chaos of the traffic and the patterns and what have you, plus the noise, the honking, the broad sort of area that's just not doesn't have any tree canopy at all. So
Yeah,
all of that, yeah.
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 So,
Thank you.
oh, of course, Marcos, I'm happy to answer them. And so, Marcos, can you time check me? How much time do I have left?
I think we have 15 minutes still. Yeah.
Okay, great. So then let's jump in, and let's go one by one. And again, I love the fact that you guys have deliberation after this. So then anything we don't conclude, right, I can just leave with you guys, and then maybe Renee or somebody else can email me afterwards feedback. Renee, does that work for you? I'm sorry, I just volunteered you.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I will be taking notes, and like in our next check-in, I can share those with you.
Sounds good. Um, all right. So the first question is this one. So these are the five. So this is a map. So on the top, you see the purple. The purple is the B4 section. So just to orient you, if you're not familiar with the map, right, there's a cluster of three right there that's just a little bit southwest of the Winthrop School and the Winthrop Park. The one on top there is the Liberation Center, where they're actually not building housing, they're going to build green space, which is really cool, and actually a really nice comparison point. And then on the south part of the map, you see in orange, those are the parcels there that are being redeveloped. They're pretty clustered close together down on that side. And that's after Quincy, right? So that's where the road opens up a little bit. I forget the name, but there's the really big church, the big red church that's on, if you're heading north, it's on the right side. So that's over there. So basically, our suggestion here was to put, two sensors in each of those clusters to capture the space. And then we're thinking, based on the concern maps, right, that it just seems natural to put one at Quincy and Blue Hill, because that's the place that people were most concerned about. I think here the big question is, what's the priority? Is it noise or is it air pollution? What's the thing we would want to know about first? And we can add the other one in the spring. It's not that we wouldn't measure it, but if we can only put up one for now, which one is it?
Um, so that intersection also has a gas station. And so, you know, if we're thinking about tracking air pollution, how much of that would be skewed by all the fumes that, you know, come out of that station?
I mean, it would capture that. But I
Mhm.
don't know. I mean, that's an interesting question. Is it being skewed by that, or is it capturing the experience that anyone standing at that intersection would
Hmm.
have?
True, true. That's right. I guess I said skewed because they're gonna be really huge, probably numbers. So I would opt to like do the other, right? Knowing that that is from the offset, it's a trouble corner because of the station.
Okay, so you would think noise for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, I'm willing to hear others. Jose just raised his hand. Jose, you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to say air pollution because it affects our health. I think wish you could go for noise and both, but air pollution I think is serious more seriously than the noise. And Olivia thinks the same too. So
Okay.
I third that.
I'm outvoted. No, but that's fine. Um, I think this goes back to like what are some possible mitigation measures, right? When to address that if we have a gas station right there, that's being the major culprit. So
Yeah, no, I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. And I think one thing I will add, and I didn't throw this out there first, is um, air pollution has seasonal effects because it relate how much air pollution goes away effectively is influenced by how warm it is. So it actually might be helpful to know about air pollution earlier because noise, apart from some, things like New Year's Eve and stuff like that, tends to be pretty stable. So we would get more information from having the air pollution earlier. So that might actually, this might work well. And so, sorry, Marcos, that you got outvoted. But this might be a nice thing in terms of advocacy.
right.
All right, let me move to the next slide. So
Dan,
additional.
just to clarify, you're saying that, like so if we go with the air pollution sensor first, the next in the next 5 months, another, like sensor will be installed to capture some of the noise and heat, for example. That is another issue that people have been saying
Yes.
concerning.
Yes. So Renee, actually two different answers to that. The air pollution sensors and the noise sensors have heat. So either one, you get heat. The only issue is, and I have argued with our sensor person about this and been basically told we can't shove the air pollution and the noise sensors together. And that's, I've been frustrated about that, but we can't do it. So we would put up air pollution. If we were to do air pollution and heat now, we would add the noise in the spring.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, round two. So basically and again, as I said, these 6 spots are based on conversations we've had with folks. They can be different spots. We're just throwing them out there as a way to kind of get some ideas going. We could probably pick 3 of these. And I know that I actually don't want to jump to assumptions. I'm assuming that because of DSNI's catchment area, you all may have a better sense of the northern half of the area, but please share opinions about the southern half as well. But for the northern half, we were throwing out there Dudley Common as as one we've already discussed, between Stafford and Moreland, in part because it's sort of well positioned in between. And another area that was cited, basically this whole area is cited as having high air pollution and heat by community members. And then the West Cottage intersection is mentioned a lot because of the cut through aspect of it, right? A lot of traffic. We've been hearing that a lot in conversations. And And then on the south end, I kind of feel like Grove Hall Mecca is sort of just like Dudley Common, right? It's a place where people go all the time. It's an important part of the community. Between Washington and Castlegate, again, it's an in-between, but also it's a place that the city is installing brand new green infrastructure in the next couple weeks or something, or in the next couple months. And so that might be a spot to capture how that is impacting the neighborhood, potentially in a good way. And then Blue Hill and Seaver, again, another one that just comes up a lot in conversations because it's a major intersection. There's a lot going on there. So yeah, just want to throw those out, and I don't know, what do you folks think? We've heard enthusiasm for Dudley Common from Marcos, but beyond that, what else stands out to people?
I'm sorry. Anybody started to think about my answers?
I was surprised that, you know, we didn't get a lot of feedback for Dudley Common because, you know, like it's the intersection, you know, like is pretty busy, right? Like, yeah. So I was expecting more people saying, yeah, Dudley Common.
It would seem
maybe people just avoid it. So, you know, like we're never going there.
Do you mean in terms of noise?
So this would be, and that's a good question. Noise or air pollution, but heat definitely.
Oh, okay. So it's something new. So it's new to us, all this, how to measure the heat. So it's new.
Of course,
Yeah, that's
understood.
why-
And please, if I'm not explaining something thoroughly, please just ask me. I apologize.
Well, I guess you know, my question is like, so how was that defined during the sessions, right? Because like, you know, when I think about noise, it's probably less like noise coming from like lake parties, right? There used to be a hotline you can call because, you know, people used to blast music, right? And but I'm thinking about like auto-generated noise, really, right? The honking, the, you know, heavy big trucks, industrial type trucks, and now more motorcycles and more mopeds that are adding to that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I think, Marcos, that's a great question. I think we got 3 types of comments about noise in the workshops, right? One was what you're saying, vehicular noise, you know, loud trucks, too much traffic, so on and so forth. The second one was concerns about construction and construction noise, and right, you know, especially looking forward, because there's a lot of construction happening on Blue Hill, right? And so a lot of concern about that ongoing noise. And then the third one that you get, and I think different people have different opinions about this, but it is that sort of category of parties, you know. We definitely had 1 or 2 people say things about like, oh, there's a barber shop down the street from you where lots of people hang out and it's loud sometimes. And yeah, some of those strike me as a different category from, you know, the vehicular and the construction. So yeah, kind of a different type of thing. And admittedly, I don't want to say, yeah, a noise sensor is probably a tool intended to really capture the first 2. I don't know how much it would really capture, you know. Maybe if it were like next to a bar that's like really, really loud at night, like we're talking like Celtics are winning in the playoffs loud, it might capture something, but I'm not sure how much it would really get from that sort of thing.
I think that the spring construction activity is heavily increased to fix the roads after winter.
Mm,
So that's something to keep note of. And then also I used to manage the farmers market at Delhi Common every week. And so I second that location. It's very useful for information, I think.
okay.
The
That's
construction though is sometimes they come very early. They come in at 7 or even before. They have those equipments. They try to women start the truck so they can start working at 7. So it makes a lot of noise when there is construction in the community. And the other one is the town common in the summertime, because there is a stage there. People
Hmm.
tend to go there without permit and just blast the speakers, different religions, during maybe around 2 or 3 o'clock when you really want some peaceful time. Or even the church is right there, so they blast the noise. The church has no air conditioner, so you have to open the windows and it goes inside. So there's a lot of noise in the summertime there at the
gotcha. That's really helpful to say, to understand.
Dan, if I just like I really appreciate this. I keep thinking about vehicular noise and how that can be or represent or be a proxy for, yeah, like what people experience in terms of like the traffic, the speeding, the lack of buffers between sort of traffic lanes and people. I guess I'm also thinking about like senior populations that it can be very disorienting, right? I mean, we have so many cars that are just like habitual honkers, right? And it's, I don't know. That's why I was like, the noise is an issue for me because for some reason it represents that chaos that's getting a little more out of hand,
Yeah.
right? And so, pedestrian safety is an issue, right? So, that's just something that I'm struggling with, but, it's maybe, for another conversation about it. Yeah.
No, and that makes sense. And so, Marcos, of these, right, which of these spots are ones where you're particularly concerned? I mean, we've talked about Dudley, so that's a spot. Are there other spots on here where you're saying like we really need to understand how that burden is playing itself out?
I muted myself, sorry. So, I mean, I think those locations are the right ones, where you have, what was it? Like West Cottage and Blue
Cottage.
Hill, right? It gets a little tricky because it's not a perfect intersection. It's like there's a little catty corner kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I have found myself when I am driving that, like, oh, I'm glad I stopped here because that car is actually, making like
He's
a
not
little funny,
stopping.
yeah. And so yeah, I think that's a really good location. You know, Castlegate and Washington, that's further up, but and I think for us it's the Stafford and Moreland. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree there.
Okay. All right. So I recognize that my time is wrapping up here.
Yeah.
I want to show you all one last thing, and I'm going to let you just deliberate it and you can get me feedback. But just to repeat what I think I'm hearing from this slide is unanimous consensus. Dudley needs, and if we can do both air pollution and noise there, everyone would love that. West Cottage would be appreciated as a place that really needs understanding in terms of noise, especially with traffic and a lot of complications there with traffic. And you spoke mainly about the north side, but I saw, I don't want to interpret too heavily, but I saw a lot of kind of nodding when I mentioned Grove Hall Mecca as sort of a natural convening place as another one to consider. Is that a fair representation of what you all said and nodded?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a tough intersection.
Yeah. Okay, then let me conclude by just showing you this last thing, which in some ways I think is the coolest part, and then I'll get out of the way. So what we did was, as I mentioned, comparison points are really important because to advocate for something being uncomfortable, you have to be able to point to where it's more comfortable. And then you also can start to have evidence of like, how much impact do trees have, right? What does it mean to have green space? And our green space is different from each other, so on and so forth. So in the activities, we asked people from the neighborhood to give us reference points, places that they were more comfortable in, right? That had less heat, had less air pollution in their estimation, less noise. And we ended up with basically two types. We ended up with people basically saying, that's a nice street. Like they got trees over there. That's a comfortable street. And as you can see, there's a bunch in the DSNI triangle that were highlighted for that. And then some others that are parks. And our thought was, for starters, to have one of each, right? And that's not a hard and fast, right? If it's decided, if you and Project Right say, like, let's just do two comfortable streets or let's do two parks, that works great too. But so then I'll send the deck to Renee right now, and this is the list of what we were given, and we also have the map over here. Just love votes. What people think would be an interesting place to capture as a comparison point, and especially if there's something particular about it. If it's a major convening place, if something happened there recently that you want to learn about, right? Like it's a new green space or something like that. That's great reasoning as well. So yeah, so I recognize I've used all my time at this point. So Marcos, if you want to ask me any last things or anybody else, but then I know I should stop talking.
Does anybody else have any questions for?
Yeah, I have one. One of the process that we're participating with the Boston Park and Recreation Department is the redesign of Dudley Town Common. They started a couple of years ago, but they had to pause it, and they are revamping the process again. I think, for what I heard in some of the comments now, like the access to the data, the noise data, the pollution data might help, like the park and recreation to come up with, creative ways to mitigate those things. I think one important aspect of all of this is, the crosswalk on that intersection, specifically in Dudley and Blue Hill. So, like a noise and honking, those are going to be especially, important to make the point that, like maybe it's not just, like redoing the Dudley Town Common, but also how we address, like pedestrian safety, or somebody say people walking is a better term. I don't know, but you know what I mean, right? Like, so.
Oh yeah, it's tough to cross over there.
Yeah. So access to the data is when we can expect some of the numbers.
That's a great question, Renee.
Okay. Yeah.
So if we put up sensors in certain spots, including Dudley Common this fall, it would probably take a couple months to have anything meaningful, right? Because it's tracking over time. And in the background, we're gonna build I don't know how to describe it. Basically, the data will stream onto a server, right, onto a computer, and then we will represent it on. We'll be able to build maps. We'll be able to build various things. I think that we can do two things, right? First off, we can just sort of start making versions of the data available, especially like to the staff of DSNI, that it won't be fully processed in a way that I think. We won't have had conversations with the community of how they want the data represented, but in the spring, or I think in semesters. So spring to me starts in January, which is bizarre. But January, February, March, we would want to start sitting down with community members and showing them ways to represent the data to figure out what works for them, right? What is accessible, what is understandable, and what are things that you all could use for advocacy or action or what have you. So that's a long way of saying spring.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing all this great information, and we'll get some feedback to you afterwards.
All right, that sounds great.
I have a
Marcos,
question, though. I have a
yes,
question
Marcos,
before you
say.
go.
Oh,
Is
Jose?
this the first, we are the first place that you starting the study, or it has been done in other places?
So that's a really good question. We have done, so every partnership like this is different, right? Because it takes on its own shape based on the collaboration and what the community is looking for. We have a partnership similar to this going in Chelsea with the City of Chelsea's planning department. They have a couple of projects there, one in particular where a freight building was being knocked down and rebuilt. And so we're helping them track the impacts of that on the housing development on one side and a playground and park on the other side. So this is, you all are, well, yes, you're our second real partner in a project like this. But also, to be clear, they're different projects, right? Every partnership is going to be different. So we have things from there that we can borrow, like the picture of the data dashboard I showed, that we can kind of learn from. But this is its own project.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
of course. All right. Well, thank you everybody for giving me the time this evening. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to the additional feedback.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, folks. So we're gonna move on to